I still remember the sound of his knuckles against my door. 3 soft knocks that shattered everything I thought I knew about my own son. It was December 23rd, 10:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I checked my watch, annoyed that someone would visit so late. James Brown stood on my porch, 16 years old, trembling in the freezing rain, and said 5 words that would save my life. "Mrs. Patterson, please don't drink it." I had no idea that in exactly 36 hours, my own flesh and blood had planned for me to be dead. Welcome, this is Voice of Deborah and I tell only true life stories. My name is Helen Patterson. I'm 63 years old, a retired high school English teacher. And up until that December night, I thought I'd done everything right as a mother. I'd raised my son Daniel alone since his father, my husband Michael, died in a construction accident when Daniel was only 7. For 23 years it had been just the 2 of us against the world. I'd sacrificed everything for that boy. Worked double shifts during summer school to pay for his expenses. Paid for his entire college education out of pocket, $85,000, so he wouldn't start his life in debt. When he married Vanessa Reyes 3 years ago, I even gave them the down payment for their house. $50,000 I'd been saving for my own retirement, gone in an instant because I wanted to see my baby boy happy. I lived alone in a modest 2-story colonial in suburban Massachusetts, the same house where Daniel grew up. The Browns lived next door. Wonderful family. David and Patricia, both doctors, with their son James, who I'd watched grow from an awkward middle schooler into a sharp, observant teenager. The holidays were always bittersweet for me. Christmas was Michael's favorite time of year, and even 16 years after his death, I'd set out his collection of vintage ornaments, string up the lights exactly how he liked them, and play his Johnny Mathis records. Daniel used to come over every Christmas Eve. We'd make Michael's famous beef bourguignon, watch Miracle on 34th Street, and I'd tell Daniel stories about his father. But things had changed over the past year. It started small, the kind of things you tell yourself not to worry about. In January, Daniel had asked to borrow $5,000. "Just until Vanessa's bonus comes through," he'd said. Vanessa worked in corporate recruiting, supposedly making excellent money. I wrote the check without hesitation. In March, he needed another $8,000. Emergency car repair, and we're between insurance payouts. By July, I'd lent them $32,000 total, and I hadn't seen a penny of repayment. When I gently brought it up during a Sunday dinner at their house, Daniel's eyes had flashed with something I'd never seen before: cold anger. "After everything you've wasted over the years, now you're counting pennies," he'd snapped. "Maybe if you'd been smarter with your money, you wouldn't have to worry about it now." Vanessa had placed a hand on his arm, giving me an apologetic smile. "He's just stressed about work, Helen. We'll get you that money back soon, I promise." But I'd noticed something odd that night. Their house was immaculate. New furniture, a 75-inch TV. Vanessa wore a designer handbag I knew cost at least $4,000. If they were so strapped for cash, where was all this money coming from? In September, Daniel had asked for access to my accounts, just in case of emergency. He'd wanted to be added as a joint owner on my checking and savings. Something in my gut had screamed no, but the rational part of my brain argued he was my only child, my only heir anyway. What difference did it make? I'd hesitated too long. His face had hardened. "I see," he'd said quietly. "You don't trust your own son. The son who spent his entire childhood watching you grieve, being quiet and good so you wouldn't have more stress. The son who gave up his dream of studying in California because you had a health scare and he didn't want to be far away." The guilt had crushed me. He was right. Daniel had always been there for me. "Sweetheart, it's not about trust." "Forget it, Mom." "Just forget I asked." He'd left my house that day and didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. By December, our relationship had deteriorated to stilted phone calls and cancelled plans. When Daniel finally invited me over for dinner on December 15th, I was relieved. Maybe we could repair whatever had fractured between us. But that dinner was wrong. Vanessa had been overly friendly, almost manic. She'd cornered me in their living room before the meal, arm around my shoulders like we were old sorority sisters. "Helen, I've been thinking. Daniel mentioned you've been having some health issues." I frowned. "What health issues? I'm healthy as can be." "Oh." Vanessa had looked genuinely surprised. "He said something about your blood pressure and... Well, you're getting up there in age. Have you thought about your estate planning? Making sure everything's in order, your will updated, that sort of thing." A chill had run through me. "My will is fine, Vanessa." "Why?" "No reason. Just, it's the responsible thing. Actually, Daniel and I have been looking into some investment opportunities. Tech startups, really cutting-edge stuff. If you wanted to get in on the ground floor, we could." "Dinner's ready." Daniel had called from the kitchen, and the moment had passed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just been sized up like a prize pig at auction. That night, after I'd gone home, I'd done something I'm not proud of. I'd looked up Vanessa's name online, adding search terms like lawsuit and fraud. What I found made my stomach drop. Vanessa Reyes had been fired from her corporate recruiting job 8 months ago. Not laid off, fired, for embezzling company funds through fake contractor payments. There was even a local news article about it, though it didn't name her directly. But I recognized the company and the timing matched. They'd been living off my money. All of it. Every penny I'd given them had been funding their lifestyle while they both pretended everything was fine. I'd felt betrayed but also confused. Daniel had a good job as an IT systems analyst. Why would they need to lie? Why not just ask me for help directly? Unless they'd needed so much money that they knew I'd start asking questions. Which brings me back to December 23rd, and James Brown standing on my doorstep in the rain. I'd invited Daniel and Vanessa over for Christmas Eve. An olive branch, my attempt to salvage our relationship. Daniel had accepted but said they could only stay for an hour or so. "We have plans with Vanessa's family," he'd explained. That afternoon, Daniel had come by early without Vanessa. He'd seemed nervous, fidgety. "I wanted to bring you something special," he'd said, pulling out a bottle of my favorite wine. Camus Cabernet Sauvignon, expensive stuff that I only drank on special occasions. "I know things have been weird between us, Mom. This is me saying I'm sorry. I love you." He'd hugged me tight and I'd felt tears in my eyes. This was my Daniel, my baby boy. Whatever money problems they had, we could work through them. "I thought we'd toast tomorrow night, just you and Vanessa and me before we head to her parents'," he'd said. "A Patterson family tradition. What do you say?" "I'd like that, sweetheart." He'd smiled, but it hadn't reached his eyes. "Perfect. Don't open it without us though, okay? I want to be there for the first glass." After he'd left, I'd set the bottle on my kitchen counter, looking forward to the next evening. Then 6 hours later, James knocked. I'd opened the door, confused to see my neighbor's teenage son standing there, soaking wet and visibly shaking. "James, what's wrong? Are your parents okay? Mrs. Patterson, please don't drink it." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Drink what?" "The wine. The bottle Daniel brought. Please don't drink it." My blood went cold. "How do you know about the wine?" James had glanced over his shoulder, as if checking whether anyone was watching. "Can I come in, please? I'll explain everything but not out here." I'd pulled him inside, grabbed a towel for him. "Start talking. Now." What came out of James's mouth over the next 20 minutes destroyed my entire world. James had been in his room studying. His window open despite the cold because he liked fresh air. Daniel and Vanessa's house was close enough that sounds carried, especially at night when the neighborhood was quiet. 2 weeks earlier, he'd overheard an argument. Vanessa's voice, loud and angry, talking about money. James hadn't paid much attention until he'd heard my name. "Can't keep asking Helen for handouts forever, Daniel. We're already in for over 30 grand. Daniel's response had been muffled, but Vanessa's next words had been crystal clear. "No, I'm serious. The insurance policy matures when she dies. $750,000. And you're the sole beneficiary. Why are we bleeding ourselves dry waiting for her to die of natural causes when we could? James had frozen, telling himself he'd misheard. But over the next 2 weeks, he'd listened more carefully. He'd heard fragments, discussions about making it look natural, about the pharmacy contact who owes me a favor, about Vanessa's expertise with medical compounds. Then 3 days ago, James had heard Daniel crying. Vanessa had been comforting him, and James had pressed his ear to his window screen. "I can't believe I'm actually going to do this," Daniel had sobbed. "She's my mother. Baby, we don't have a choice anymore. The investors are threatening us. If we don't pay back what we borrowed by January 15th, they're going to come after everything. Our house, our cars, maybe worse. Your mom has been dying alone in that house for 16 years anyway. You said yourself she never got over your dad. We're putting her out of her misery. It's still murder, Vanessa. It's mercy. And survival. She'd want you to be safe." James had been paralyzed with indecision. What if he'd misunderstood? What if it was some kind of dark joke? But then, yesterday afternoon, he'd seen Daniel arrive at my house carrying a distinctive bottle with gold foil wrapping. Camus Cabernet, the same brand his parents served at their anniversary dinner. This evening, he'd waited until his parents were asleep, then snuck out to warn me. "I know this sounds insane, Mrs. Patterson. But I swear I'm telling you the truth. I think they put something in that bottle. Something that'll kill you and make it look like a heart attack or stroke. Please, you have to believe me." I'd stood there, my mind refusing to process what I was hearing. My Daniel. My son who used to leave me hand-drawn cards signed, "I love you, Mommy." Who'd held my hand at Michael's funeral and promised we'd always have each other. "This is impossible," I'd whispered. "You're mistaken. You must be." James had grabbed my arm. "Mrs. Patterson, please." I heard them. "And there's something else. Yesterday I saw Vanessa go into your backyard. You weren't home. She was there for like 10 minutes looking in your windows, trying your back door. Why would she do that unless she was planning something?" After James left, I'd made him promise not to tell anyone yet. I'd sat in my dark living room, staring at that bottle of wine. Everything in me wanted to dismiss James's account as the overactive imagination of a teenager who'd watched too many crime shows. But I couldn't ignore the facts. Vanessa's job loss, the constant need for money, Daniel's strange behavior, that conversation about my will. $750,000. I'd taken out that life insurance policy 20 years ago, when Daniel was still in elementary school. I'd wanted to make sure he'd be taken care of if anything happened to me. I'd never updated it, never reduced it even after he became an adult with his own career. In my mind, it was just one more way to protect my son. It had never occurred to me that it could be a motive for him to kill me. At 2 a.m., I'd made a decision. I'd carefully photographed the bottle from every angle, including the seal. Then I'd used gloves to open it and pour a small amount, maybe half an ounce, into a clean glass jar I'd washed thoroughly. I'd sealed the jar and hidden it in my basement workshop, behind a panel I'd installed years ago for storing Michael's watch collection. If James was right, I needed evidence. If he was wrong, I'd destroyed my relationship with my son based on a teenager's suspicions. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Daniel as a child. His laugh, the way he'd run to me when he scraped his knee, how he'd cried on his first day of kindergarten until I'd promised to be waiting at pickup. How had that little boy become someone who could plot his own mother's murder? Unless Vanessa had manipulated him. The Daniel I knew had a conscience. Vanessa, though. Vanessa I was starting to realize I'd never really known at all. Daniel and Vanessa arrived at 7 p.m. as planned. Vanessa carried a plate of cookies, from a new bakery we love. Daniel had a shopping bag with wrapped presents. They seemed relaxed, cheerful even. Vanessa hugged me like we were best friends. "Merry Christmas, Helen. Oh my gosh, it smells amazing in here. Is that beef bourguignon?" "Michael's recipe," I'd said, watching her face carefully. "I make it every year." "Well, we're honored to share it with you," Vanessa had said smoothly. We'd eaten dinner. I'd made sure to serve everyone from the same dishes, paranoid now about anything they might try. The conversation was superficial. Whether Vanessa's new job opportunities, Daniel's upcoming promotion at work, likely fiction, I now realized. After dinner, Vanessa had glanced at Daniel, then smiled at me. "Should we open that wine now, Helen? Have our toast?" My heart had started pounding. "Sure, sweetheart. Why don't you and Daniel get the glasses from the cabinet? I'll grab the bottle." As they turned toward the dining room, I'd made my move. I'd quickly switched the Camus bottle Daniel had brought with an identical one I'd purchased that morning. Same brand, similar fill level, but completely safe. The poisoned bottle I'd carefully placed in a plastic bag and hidden in the garage. When we'd gathered in the living room, Vanessa had done the honors of opening the bottle. I'd watched her hands carefully, steady, confident. If there was poison in there, she knew exactly what she was doing. "To family," Vanessa had said, raising her glass. "To family," Daniel had echoed, his eyes meeting mine. I'd raised my glass but barely sipped, letting the wine touch my lips without swallowing much. I'd watched them over the rim of my glass. They'd both taken full drinks, relaxed, waiting. We'd talked for another hour. Vanessa kept suggesting I finish my drink, even offering to pour me more. "Come on, Helen, it's Christmas. Enjoy yourself." But I'd nursed that one glass, claiming I was on medication that didn't mix well with alcohol, that the wine was so good I wanted to savor it. By 9 p.m., I'd noticed Vanessa was getting agitated. She checked her phone multiple times, exchanged looks with Daniel. "Well," Daniel had finally said, standing abruptly, "we should head to Vanessa's parents." "Already?" protested. "You just got here. We promised them we'd be there by 10, Vanessa had said, also standing quickly. She'd glanced at my nearly full glass. "You sure you don't want to finish that? Shame to waste such good wine. I'll save it for after you leave. Have a nightcap by the fire." I'd walked them to the door, hugged Daniel goodbye. Maybe for the last time as mother and son, though he didn't know that yet. "Love you, Mom," he'd whispered. "Love you too, sweetheart." After they'd left, I'd poured the wine from my glass into another specimen jar, sealed it, and added it to my collection of evidence. Then I'd sat down and called the police. Detective Sarah Gonzalez had arrived within an hour, along with another officer. I'd explained everything. James's warning, the overheard conversations, my suspicions about Vanessa, the switched bottles. "Mrs. Patterson, these are serious accusations," she'd said carefully. "Before we proceed, I need to ask, has Daniel or Vanessa ever threatened you directly?" "No, but has anyone witnessed them planning to harm you, besides James Brown's account of conversations he overheard through a window?" "No, but I have the bottles, which you've handled and potentially contaminated. And you've admitted you switched them, so we can't even be certain which bottle Daniel originally brought." I'd felt my case crumbling. "So you won't help me?" Detective Gonzalez had softened. "I didn't say that. I believe you're genuinely afraid. And the financial situation you've described does warrant investigation. But I need to be honest, what you have right now isn't enough for an arrest. It's barely enough for a search warrant." She'd arranged for the wine to be taken to a lab for analysis. "If it comes back positive for poison, everything changes. Until then, I strongly suggest you don't stay alone with either of them." I'd spent Christmas Day alone in a hotel room, my phone turned off, feeling like I was losing my mind. Had I destroyed my relationship with my son over paranoid delusions? Had Vanessa really planned to murder me? Or was I an old woman who'd let a teenager's overactive imagination poison my own mind? The lab results came back on December 27th. Detective Gonzalez had called me personally. "Mrs. Patterson, I owe you an apology. The wine contained a lethal dose of digoxin, a heart medication that in high quantities can cause cardiac arrest. The medical examiner says the amount in that bottle would have caused death within hours, and likely would have been ruled natural causes in a woman your age unless someone specifically tested for it." The relief and horror had hit me simultaneously. I wasn't crazy. But my son had actually tried to kill me. "We're obtaining arrest warrants now," Detective Gonzalez had continued. "We'll bring them both in for questioning this afternoon. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to prepare yourself. This is going to get very public very quickly." That same morning, before the police could reach them, they'd shown up at my house. I wasn't there, I was still at the hotel, but James Brown had seen them from his window. He'd watched Vanessa break a basement window and climb inside, emerging 15 minutes later with something in her hands. James had immediately called 911, and the police had caught them before they could flee the neighborhood. What Vanessa had stolen from my house: the life insurance policy documents from my file cabinet. She'd been trying to destroy evidence of motive. During the arrest, Daniel had completely fallen apart. Within hours of being separated from Vanessa and questioned, he'd confessed everything. What really happened? What emerged was somehow worse than I'd imagined. Vanessa wasn't just a fired recruiter. She'd been running an elaborate embezzlement scheme for 2 years, creating fake contractors and pocketing their payments. She'd also gotten involved with high-stakes gambling, convinced she could develop a system. By the time she'd been fired, she was $90,000 in debt to people who didn't accept payment plans. She'd targeted Daniel specifically because she'd known about his wealthy, widowed mother. She'd researched me, found out about the life insurance policy, and had spent 3 years methodically driving a wedge between Daniel and me, making him resent every dollar I'd ever spent on anything but him. The borrowed money. Vanessa had been using it to pay gambling debts while simultaneously borrowing from loan sharks to pay bills. It was a death spiral, and her creditors had given her until mid-January to come up with $50,000 or they'd kill her. Vanessa had convinced Daniel that I was dying anyway, that I was deeply depressed, suicidal even, that I'd told her privately I wanted to join Michael. None of it was true, but Daniel, desperate to save his wife and under her psychological manipulation, had believed her. She said it would be like assisted suicide, Daniel had sobbed to the police. That Mom wanted to die but was too scared to do it herself. That we'd be helping her, and the money would let us start over somewhere safe. I knew it was wrong, but Vanessa said if I didn't help, the men she owed money to would hurt me too. The digoxin had come from Vanessa's pharmacy contact, actually a former colleague she was blackmailing over his own theft of medications. Detective Gonzalez had found messages on Vanessa's laptop, encrypted but retrievable, where she'd been communicating with another man, someone she'd been having an affair with for 8 months. In those messages, she'd talked about the insurance money, about starting a new life, and about how Daniel's usefulness will be over once we have the cash. Weak men have tragic accidents all the time. When Daniel learned this in interrogation, something inside him shattered. He told the police everything, handed over his phone records, Vanessa's hiding places, names of everyone involved. Vanessa Reyes was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, extortion, and a dozen other charges. She's currently serving 25 years to life. Her gambling creditors were also arrested based on Daniel's testimony. Daniel was charged as an accessory to attempted murder. His lawyer argued he'd been psychologically abused and manipulated, that he'd been a victim of Vanessa's as well. The prosecutor pushed for a harsh sentence, arguing that being manipulated didn't absolve him of trying to kill his own mother. I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I wrote a letter to the judge on Daniel's behalf. I didn't excuse what he'd done. I didn't minimize the betrayal. But I explained the Daniel I'd known for 30 years, the kind, sensitive boy who'd been shattered by his father's death and had spent his adult life looking for someone to make him feel safe. Vanessa had exploited that vulnerability. I told the judge that if there was a possibility for rehabilitation, for my son to get the psychological help he desperately needed, I wanted him to have that chance. Not for his sake or even for mine, but for Michael's. My husband had loved that little boy with everything he had. If there was any part of that little boy left inside the man who tried to kill me, Michael would have wanted me to try to save him. Daniel was sentenced to 8 years, with a possibility of parole after 5 pending completion of intensive therapy. He's currently 2 years into his sentence. He writes to me sometimes. Letters I read but don't respond to yet. Maybe someday I will. Maybe someday I won't. James Brown received a civilian commendation for his bravery. He's in college now, studying criminal justice. His parents say he still has nightmares sometimes about what would have happened if he'd waited even one more day to tell me. Think about that too. As for me, I sold the house. Too many ghosts, too many memories of both Michael's love and Daniel's betrayal. I moved to a small condo in Vermont, near a lake where Michael and I vacationed once. I updated my life insurance policy, changing the beneficiary to a charity that helps children who've lost parents to workplace accidents. I'm dating someone, Robert, a widower I met at a grief support group. He knows everything and he still chose to let me into his life. That feels like a miracle some days. I've learned some hard lessons. That love without wisdom is dangerous. That you can do everything right and still lose. That blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. And sometimes strangers care more about your survival than your own family. But I've also learned that instincts matter. That small voices telling difficult truths, like a teenage boy brave enough to knock on a door late at night, can save your life. That even in the darkest betrayal, there are still people who will stand up and do the right thing, even when it's terrifying. I'm 65 now. I've survived the loss of my husband, raising a child alone, and my son's attempt to murder me. I'm still here. And every Christmas Eve I pour myself a glass of wine, checked and verified safe, and I toast to Michael. I tell him about James, about Robert, about the life I'm still living. I tell him I tried my best with Daniel, that I'm sorry I couldn't protect him from Vanessa, from his own worst choices. Then I toast to second chances, to survival, and to the strange mercy of fate that put a teenager with an open window and a sense of right and wrong in the house next door. Thank you for staying with me through what I've shared tonight. I know it wasn't easy to hear. If you got something from it, whether it's a reminder to trust your instincts, to pay attention to red flags, or just to appreciate the people in your life who tell you hard truths, please consider subscribing to this channel and hitting that notification bell. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe someone who's being manipulated and can't see it yet. Maybe someone who's afraid to speak up about something wrong they've witnessed. Maybe someone who just needs to know that survival is possible, even after unimaginable betrayal. The biggest lesson I learned. Family is supposed to be about love, but love without honesty, without respect, without boundaries becomes toxic. And sometimes the people who save you aren't the ones you expect. They're the neighbors, the strangers, the kids who are paying attention when no one thinks they are. Trust your gut. Verify everything. And never, ever drink wine you didn't watch being poured from a sealed bottle you bought yourself. Stay safe out there, everyone. And thank you for listening to what I've been through.